Morning, everybody. Good morning. I'll give you a few minutes. 2 Samuel chapter 9. 2 Samuel. And for your information, the outline for the message is on the back of the bulletin. So if you want to follow along, you can do that. Kenny asked me to do that for you, so there it is. So I'll start working on this one on Tuesday. Went pretty easily. We had some stumbling blocks. There's a hard word to pronounce in here, but you'll see it. So anyway, 2 Samuel chapter 9. So last Sunday's message, if you were here, I'm looking out, most of you were here last Sunday. Paul described for us in the text the human race's problem. And that problem was this. He described it, and I called it a repulsive corpse. And then he gave us some ideas of what that corpse looked like. With no hope, he gives us this description, and then he gives us some great words that trusting Christ, we are then justified freely by his grace. Now, this morning, I want you to pay attention to that word. What word? The word grace. Pay attention to it. We use that word grace in a lot of different ways, but I don't really think we fully understand the work of grace. So I want you to listen to that word. And I want to give you a heads up, a warning. So on the pages of my message this morning, I've got 9 pages. Don't be alarmed though, I do a lot of double spacing. On the pages of my message this morning, I counted them just this morning. I used the word grace 95 times. 95 times. So using it just now, that makes it 96. So the reason I did that is I literally saturated the message with that word because I want you to understand grace. I want you to understand that grace literally saturates our lives, but we're unaware of it. And so that's what I want you to see this morning, okay? As Paul finished writing, and as he was heading towards the end, in Romans chapter 5, remember last week was Romans 3, in verse 6, what Paul does is he begins to, with a stroke of a brush, he begins to paint this portrait again. And it's a portrait that's not very attractive. It's about us again. You know, he's went from giving us this picture of us as a corpse, then giving us hope, and now he's going back to giving us this portrait again. And in summary, in verse 6 of chapter 5, here's what he says. He says, we are unable to help ourselves. Think of that. We are living against God. We are sinners. I put a big emphasis on that last week. We are literally enemies of God. And then he concludes, such are the people for whom God died. What's that called? Grace. Grace, okay? Verse 8 then of chapter 5, hope shows up again. For in verse 8 is what I call the verse of grace, because here's what it says. God shows his great love for us, or demonstrates his great love for us, in this way. Christ died while we were yet sinners. So what do we call that? That's grace. Now, for me, and I hope for you, I love grace. I love it. I love what it does. I love what it stands for. I love what it's done in our lives. And so I might throw the question at you. Aren't you glad today? Aren't you glad today that God didn't look at our messed up lives and say, I'll die for you when you deserve it? Aren't you glad he didn't do that? That wouldn't be grace, would it, okay? So in our text today, that leads me to the text, what we're going to do is we're going to see one of the greatest examples of God's grace. David will be the giver of the grace, and Elizabeth will be the receiver. Wait a minute. Who? You heard that word right. Who? I think I've read this story many times over the years. I have failed to preach on it in 50 years. And I think it's because I was afraid of the name. It's a mouthful. So if you happen to hear me refer to some guy by the name of M, you'll know who I'm talking about. It'll be a lot easier to do that. So Mephibosheth, who was he? He was Jonathan's son, grandson of Saul, the first king of Israel. Word had quickly spread through the countryside that King Saul and Prince Jonathan are dead, and David is now king. At the house of Jonathan, this not only brought grief, but it was great panic. And you might wonder why. Well, in those days, back in those days, when a new king staked out his territory, what he did is he would look for family members of the previous royal family. And what he would do is he would send his henchmen to murder those people because he always felt like they were a threat. As a matter of fact, to be more specific, I'm looking at 2 Samuel chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. You don't have to turn there, though, to give you some history. Here's what it says. They, David's henchmen, went into the house and found Ishobeth sleeping on his bed. This is one of Jonathan's sons. They struck and killed him and cut off his head. Then taking his head with them, in this ugly scene, they fled across the Jordan Valley through the night. So all night they're riding with this guy's head on their horse, and when they arrive in Hebron, they present his head to David. They're proving to David that they killed a relative. They exclaim to the king, "Here's the head of Ishbosheth, the son of your enemy Saul, who tried to kill you. Today the Lord has given my lord the king revenge on Saul and his entire family." That just sounds awful, doesn't it? That they would do something like that to get revenge because they were afraid of what might happen to them. But before we get to the main text, I want you to keep this in mind now. I want you to see 2 Samuel 4:4. 2 Samuel 4:4. Maybe that's 1 Samuel 4:4. I think it is. Let me take a quick look. I think it might be a typo error in my notes here. Yeah, it would be 1 Samuel 4:4. Here's what it says. I'm going to read it for you. You don't necessarily have to turn here. Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel. No, I think that is 2 Samuel 4:4. That's right. That Saul and Jonathan had been killed in a battle. I already told you that. When the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up and fled. But as she hurried away, she dropped him and he became a cripple. So here's what I want to do, like I often do. I want to set the scene for you. I want to give you sort of the story, the background. I want you to go there with me. I want you to be standing outside the door of the nursery where little M is being taken care of by his nurse. Okay? So he's sitting there, little M sitting there. He's playing on the floor with one of his toys, like a little 5-year-old would be doing. And he's oblivious to everything. He's 5 years old. He had no clue that his life was in danger. And so while he's playing with his toys, his nurse burst into the room, and she sees what he's doing. She kicks the toys out of his hand. She grabs him, and she heads towards the door to run for safety because she knows that the henchmen are there, and they're there to kill anyone that's related to Saul or Jonathan. And as she's rushing out the door she drops him. Now, it doesn't describe how this happened. I cannot imagine carrying a 5-year-old and dropping him on his feet and him becoming crippled. I mean, I just can't picture that. So I'm kind of thinking, and this is heaterology, you can take it or leave it. I'm kind of thinking as she's rushing out the door, he's fighting with her a little bit. He falls out of her hands and he hits his head. And perhaps something happened, he hurt his spine or something, and it crippled him. So he's crippled for life, according to what we just read. Now, that poor nurse, can you imagine? One of you guys imagine carrying a kid, dropping a kid, and that kid becomes crippled? she's got to be frantic. She's got to be out of her mind. Baby screaming, they're pounding on the door. David's henchmen are looking to kill anyone from Jonathan's family. And so, what's going on? Was this to be M's destiny? Is this the way he was going to have his life instead of living as a pauper? Maybe he should have lived as a prince. Well, what's his destiny? And so here she is. She's got all this running through her mind. Oh my gosh, have I destroyed his future? And she's carrying him out there, and she's looking. She's unable to escape. She's headed out to the garage, and she knows. She puts him in the electric wheelchair, and they head off into the garage. They get into the garage, and there's the van equipped with someone that's crippled, waiting, and off they go and get away from the danger. Well, that was a mouthful, wasn't it? But M would later on discover that there would come a day that would have a greater impact on his life and on his future than that day that he fell and became a cripple. He will see that someday he will find grace. He will find grace. So we're going to learn from this story today, from the life of him, that we have a lot in common. I want us to see that we have a lot of common. Think about it. Aren't we the creation of the Creator, each one of us? If we are the creation of the Creator, doesn't that make us sort of royalty? I mean, remember what the psalmist said about you and me? He said this, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. He said that about us. So think of yourself as royalty. You were created by the Creator. There's no one like you. And don't you carry the wounds of a fall? According to Romans 5 and verse 6 that I talked about earlier. We are without strength. We can't do anything on ourselves to get ourselves saved. So don't you carry the wounds of the fall? And hasn't each one of us lived in the fear of our King that we've never seen? So we have something in common with him, okay? So here's him. He would soon understand Paul's portrait of us paupers. And when we were unable to help ourselves, he'll see that. Now think of it. 2 decades pass. So M's about 25, 26 years old. He's still young. He's the crippled prince. He lives in a distant land. We'll see that in our text in a minute. He's unable to walk to the king. He's too fearful to talk to the king. He's unable to help himself. Now Israel, at this point in time, 26 years later, is at peace. If you'll read all of 2 Samuel, you'll find it to be the case, for we see that David, the shepherd king, did not forget his promise to Jonathan that he made in 1 Samuel chapter 20 and verse 15. When Jonathan said to Samuel, and they both agreed to this, he said this, treat my family with this faithful love, even when the Lord destroys all your enemies from the face of the earth. So maybe David at this point in his life is thinking about that. He's reflecting. So look at 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to look at David here. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. David's reflecting. And David said, is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul? Now watch this. This is a key phrase here. That I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake. And there was a house of Saul, a servant whose name was Ziba. And when they had called him unto David, the king said unto him, are you Ziba? And he said, yes. I am your servant. And the king said, is there not yet any of the house of Saul? Now watch this. I think this is the key to the entire text. That I may show the kindness of God unto him. Could we translate to say this? that he wants to show the grace of God to him. I want to show him the kindness of him. And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan has a son, which is lame on his feet. So here we go. We have this picture, right? Now I want to divert from that thinking just for a minute before I take you back to the text. And I want you to understand something about the word grace. To the devil, grace is a dirty word. He hates that word. And the reason that he hates that word grace is because grace is the power behind the gospel. It's not the power behind some creed. It's not some power behind some religion or some philosophy. It is the power behind the gospel of grace. Here is the wonder of the gospel. Listen to this. Here's the wonder of the gospel. That God would reach somebody like me. That God would reach somebody like you. Here's the distinction of the gospel. That God would reach somebody like me. That God would reach somebody like you. Did you ever think about this? Every religion of the world says do. But Christianity, the gospel of grace, says done. Think of it. Grace has been given many definitions. One of my favorites is this: God's favor that is unearned, undeserved, and unrepayable. The concept of grace is key to the entirety of the New Testament. Here's something that I think we just don't understand, and this is one of the reasons I chose this message this morning. Too often, we limit the work of salvation in our lives. What I'm saying is this: we know that we are saved by grace, right? For by grace are you saved through faith, right? We know that, okay? We accept that. You have to accept that to be saved. You can't work your way into heaven, okay? You have to understand that. But listen, grace does not stop at your salvation. Grace is the power for our lives. It's how we live our lives. And so today, when you leave here today, I want you to know that about grace. I want you to understand the importance of grace. It's by grace alone that we even have power in our lives, okay? Listen to what 2 Timothy says in chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. Okay? 1 Peter 4:10, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. In 2 Peter it says, grow in grace. So it seems to me that grace is beyond just salvation. It's the power to live our lives. And so Satan would love for us to just leave the grace of God at the altar of salvation. But God's grace only starts there. It just starts there, enriching and enabling our lives. And something the devil will tell you is this: you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You've got to do things in your own strength. Well, you know, that's the knee-jerk reaction, isn't it? When something comes into our life, I'll take care of it. Then we figure out we can't take care of it. And what do we need to depend on then? God's grace. God's grace, that's how it works. So grace is God's undeserved favor on our lives. I love grace. I love that God has saved me by his amazing grace. I love that God sustains me by his marvelous grace. I love that God heals my hurts and my pain by his healing grace. I love it that God's grace is sufficient. Grace is more than just saving. It's anything you want it to be. Listen to this. Listen to this chorus of this great old hymn. I wish I was in voice today and I'd sing it for you. But I'm kind of hoarse already. So let me just give you the chorus of this great old hymn. Grace, grace, God's grace. Grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace. Grace that is greater than all our sin. Or how about the wonderful grace of Jesus? One of my favorite hymns. Here's how it goes. Now I want you to think about grace as I'm saying this. How can you not? I'm overworking the word just for our sakes, okay? Wonderful grace of Jesus, greater than all my sin, How shall my tongue describe it? Where shall its praise begin? Taking away my burden, setting my spirit free. For the wonderful grace of Jesus reaches even me. And then the chorus, wonderful grace of Jesus, reaching to all the lost. By it I've been pardoned, saved to the uttermost. Chains have been torn asunder, giving me liberty. For the wonderful grace of Jesus reaches even me. Wonderful, matchless grace of Jesus, deeper than the mighty rolling sea, higher than a mountain, sparkling like a fountain, all-sufficient grace for even me. Broader than the scope of my transgressions, greater far than all my sin and shame. Oh, magnify the precious name of Jesus. Praise his name. So our text picks up where David had just subdued his greatest enemies, the Philistines, the Moabites, and the Syrians. You can read that in 2 Samuel chapter 8. And so the scene is, and I've just given you verses 1, 2, and 3, is this. So, we're gone now, and you guys still at the nursery, you need to come with me now to David's place. So we're sitting outside David's palace there, and we've got an eye view of his room where he hangs out in the evening. And so one evening, while he's enjoying a cup of Starbucks in the palace, he's looking back over the past, and he's thinking about the past. He knows that he's come from a sheepfold to a throne room. I mean, he's thinking about, wow, I was once out there mending the sheep, and now I'm in the throne room. And no doubt at this point in his life, he's taken back by the wonder of God's grace on his life. And so I believe he began to look for a way as he's there, having that nice cup of Java and thinking about his life. I think he's trying to consider a way he can demonstrate the grace of God. Isn't that what we should do, really? When we think about what God has done in our life, saved us by his grace, allowed us to overcome things by his grace, he's thinking about a way he could demonstrate the grace of God to someone that was just unworthy as he was. Because remember, folks, we're just as unworthy as the next guy, right? Okay? So, as a matter of fact, verse 3 of our text proves my point when he says that I may show the kindness of God unto someone. M then would become the recipient of David's act of grace, but there's a deeper story here. The story of God's grace towards us. It reveals how we can find grace. And so the proposition for the message is simply, amazing grace that saved a wretch like me. And that takes us to finally point number 1. I'm winded after that whole introduction. Point number 1. Grace begins in the throne room and finds us. Verses 1 through 5. Once again, David in verse 1. He asked a question. He says to Ziba, is there anybody in Saul's house that I can show kindness to? I want to show the goodness of God to. Now remember, he's doing this after he's reflected. When I read that verse, the thought occurred to me that grace has always begun in the throne room. See, David's in the throne room, and that's where the grace starts. And just like him, before we ever become aware of grace, because here's him, he's living, and I'll tell you where he's living in a minute. He's been living for 20 plus years in a humble surrounding, a crippled guy. He has no idea what David's thinking. He has no idea that David's going to show him grace. It's the same thing for you and I. We had no idea that God was preparing to show us grace. And where did it all begin? It began in the throne room. From the very throne of heaven is where grace began. And so, while we were yet in sin, just like Adam is still crippled, what did he do? What did God do with his grace? What did he do? He sought you out, right? He sought us out. He sought us out and he found us. And so God's grace remembers us. It always remembers. Think about him for a minute. Think about this poor kid. Forgotten by his nation, abandoned by his family. There's no reason to remember this guy. But it's simply because of God's grace that David remembers this kid. Now, he doesn't know that he's crippled. He just wanted to know if there was somebody out there. As far as he knew, there could have been some adult out there, but he does not know this, okay? So in verse 3b, which I just read to you a minute ago, Ziba is quick to remind David that him is crippled. Now, my curiosity